Hello and welcome to the Grad Ireland Graduate Careers Fair for the latest in our seminar series. And we're here to discuss an issue which we could ask a lot about, which is, I suppose it is a very complicated issue, there's a lot of detail in it, and it's visas for international students. What exactly is involved in working and obviously transitioning from study to work in Ireland for students from outside the EU, as we've called it, international students. And listen, without further ado, as we've so much to cover, I'd just like to welcome our panel here. I'd like to thank you for joining us here today. First, we have Shane Mooney, who's Head of Student Experiences at Dublin Business School. And he's also the chair of ICOS, which is the Council for International Students.
Irish Council for International Students, Rory. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Shane. And we also have Aoife Kilmurray, who's Senior Manager in Global Immigration Services with PwC. Thanks both for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time to be with us here today. Shane, can you give us a quick overview of what are the most common visas that students are studying here on, and what the transition is to the world of work?
Yeah, certainly, Rory. Yeah, the two main types of study visas are, there's one for English language students, English language and non-degree programs. That's a maximum permission of 8 months, and that can be extended 3 times up to a maximum of 24 months or 2 years. But the second type and the most relevant to us here is the study visa for non-EEA students who are applying to take a degree program. And a degree program is anything defined as a program of at least level 7 qualification. This goes from undergraduate right through to postgraduate programs, and one of the major attractions to these visas, Rory, is the stay-back scheme, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But what's really important on both visas is that students have a work entitlement. You're allowed to work 20 hours during the week, except for summertime, which is June to September, and during the Christmas holiday. I think the message is that the message for students is you are here first and foremost to study, and work should be interfering with the study, because we want to be handing over work ready graduates to Aoife and to industry when they're done with us. Okay,
so Aoife, students, and again, excuse me if I get the technical terms wrong here, but when they finish study and as Shane said, they're ready to transition into work, what's the next step in terms of how the visas transition or change, or just explain to us how that all works?
Yeah, so I suppose there's really a couple of different avenues available. The first and probably the most common one that most people will avail of is to obtain graduate scheme permission. So it's called 1G permission. So if you're a graduate of an Irish university, you can avail of graduate scheme permission. It allows you to stay in Ireland after you've graduated, and allows you to look for a job, and in the longer term then to obtain an employment permit. So that's probably the most common option that people would avail of. Another option would be, there's different things. So say you want to become a trainee accountant, there is a particular permission available for that, where you would do your training with one of the accountancy bodies and a firm like the likes of PwC, and there's obviously other ones as well. And then there's also the option of going straight and obtaining an employment permit. Now there's obviously a list of qualifying criteria accredited to obtaining an employment permit. And as a recent graduate, you may or may not be eligible. You may not tick all those boxes. So we would find most people would firstly avail of the graduate scheme permission. It's granted for 12 months initially. So it gives you plenty of time to stay here, to work, or maybe to find that longer term employment and ultimately obtain an employment permit.
Okay. And Shane, have there been any changes? I know there's some changes over the last few years in terms of the study visa or indeed the 1G permit. What some of those changes have been?
Yeah, I think Aoife's just touched on the major change there, which is when you successfully complete your program, the ability to apply for the 1G visa, which allows you to work full time without having to have sponsorship from a company during that time. Okay, this is a massive advantage to students and to employers, because a student can get into a company, show what they're good at, for the employers, if it works out and that employee is going really well, then the employers can think about think about actually sponsoring that person going forward after that. So that's the biggest area, Rory, is the stayback, and this has made Ireland extremely attractive to international students over the last number of years, and not just because of that, but employers recognise that this fantastic skill set and these fantastic students are coming in, and they are available to come into the Irish workforce and meet the skills gaps that have been identified by government and relevant authorities.
And Shane, just one question that was asked to me prior to the actual session starting: if someone was, say, resident, was a non-EU from, for example, China or India, and they were living in another EU country for several years on a long-term residency, perhaps their parents were working there, whatever, is that make any difference to what they would need to come and study in Ireland?
No, it doesn't necessarily make a difference, Rory. What you're doing is you are applying for you are applying to study in Ireland. So you're applying to the Irish authorities to study in Ireland. So it shouldn't necessarily make a difference. It's probably when you're applying for the visa, you apply through the through the embassy in your local, the nearest embassy. So they would consider all applications.
Okay. So Aoife, in terms of companies sponsoring international students, what should students know about what you can and can't do? Because I know that a lot of our events, we get asked many questions about, by both international students and by companies asking about, the students that are coming to the fair. What do they need to know about what you can and can't do in terms of sponsorship?
Okay, so I think when we're talking about sponsorship, we're talking about an employment permit. There's essentially, if you're going to be hired by an Irish employer, there's 9 different types of employment permit. There's really two that are applicable in such situations. They're either the critical skills permit or a general employment permit. A general employment permit, maybe if I start with the critical skills employment permit, as Shane would have alluded to, there are skills gaps identified in the Irish market where, there's not enough people to fill those skills. So there's particular roles which are more eligible for a critical skills employment permit than others. I think when it comes to actually, what you should be aware of when it comes to the employer, a lot of bigger employers will be well aware of this. They'll have policies in place as regards hiring non-EA students. So they will have policies in place. They will be aware of this. A lot of smaller employers won't be. So I think one of the key things to be aware of there is, if you have been offered a role with an employer, is to make sure to discuss that with them, at that onboarding stage or before you onboard, and actually say to them, look, I'm going to need immigration and employment permit here. What do you need from me, and what do I need to do? And are you aware of, the eligibility criteria that, that I'm actually eligible for this permit? So it's really around having that conversation in advance, making sure everything is, all your boxes are ticked in advance. The last thing you want is to start a job and suddenly realize that actually there's something I need to do here, because that's going to lead to difficulties. So it's really about planning in advance, and the earlier you can do all of that, the better.
And is there any good resources that people can go to, students can go to, in terms of finding out what exactly they need to do?
Yeah. I mean, if you're not getting kind of the information you need off your employer, and like I said, some employers just won't have that knowledge base. A good place to look is the actual Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation. So they're the government department responsible for issuing employment permits. So they will have quite a wealth of information up there around the eligibility criteria. What you can and can't do, what you're eligible for, what salary level you need to be at, what qualification you need to have to actually meet the requirements of that role. So they're quite a good resource when it comes to the employment permit side of things. Alternatively, your employer may get in touch with the likes of us, or there's other people out there as well who can assist with them with actually applying for the permit for them.
Okay.
The other thing, just to come in that, thanks, Rory. One of the most common questions that we get asked by students is, I've now progressed to my dissertation. I'm not in college. Can I have a letter saying that I can work 40 hours per week? The the immigration is very strict on the maximum, on the amount of hours that you can work per week. There was a change during COVID. They allowed all international students to increase to 40 hours while college buildings were closed. They are now reopened, and they recently sent out a communication saying it's back to the old rules. So the rules are, regardless of what stage your program you're at, if you are a student, you can only work 40 hours per week during the summer months, which is June through to September, and at Christmas, during the Christmas holiday period. Outside of that, the maximum you can work is 20 hours per week. We sometimes get, I've received a lot of communication from our students quite recently saying, oh yeah, well, I've got a job and I've got a job with an employer. They're looking for a letter because I've only got my dissertation left. That doesn't matter. The immigration are very set in their hours, and that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
Us as colleges, our employers, we can't change that.
Yeah.
And if a student can make us change it, well, let me know.
Okay. I mean, just have a question come in there, Shane, and sorry, Eva.
No, sorry. I was just going to jump in really quickly there, and just leading on to what Shane is saying. That is also actually applying to recent graduates who are awaiting their 1G permission. Yeah. So some recent graduates who they're currently on stamp 2 student permission, have applied for their 1G permission, may actually be starting graduate programs with employers at the moment. And effectively from today, they have to move back to 20 hours per week until their graduate scheme permission. There are significant delays in getting updated Irish residence permits at the moment. We're talking 8 weeks to get your passport back and get your updated IRP issued. Right. So there's impact. So it doesn't just apply, and we've been back and forth with the authorities on this, trying to get a concession for these people who've recently graduated. As Shane said, they're very set in their ways. It's legislated for, they're not for moving. So I would say to people, just to be very wary of that, and don't find yourself in breach of immigration permission.
This is great practical information. I can imagine, I mean, it's a challenging time for all students and graduates, but I can imagine for students and graduates in this situation, must add a whole new level of stress and uncertainty. Listen, I just want to touch on this briefly. Brexit. Eva, from your own point of view, will that make any difference to what you can and can't do, or is it all still TBC?
Like, to be perfectly honest with you, from an Irish immigration perspective, there's very limited impact of Brexit come 1 January, to be perfectly honest. If you're a UK national and you want to study in Ireland, there's absolutely no restriction. That's fine. The status quo remains. The common travel between Ireland and the UK remains. So Irish nationals can go to the UK and UK to Ireland and vice versa. So there's limited impact. Now, there's a lot of it still up in the air, so there's some things that need to be bottomed out. But as things currently stand, it's pretty much business as usual.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, Rory, I might just come in on that. From a macro level, it is going to be a bit challenging for the Irish third level sector, because the UK didn't have a stay-back scheme. They have recently, as of the start of September, they've introduced a 2-year stay-back scheme. So it'll be interesting to see how that weighs out. But I was recently talking to potential students from India, and we were just quoting some stuff, and you just see from this event, the amount of employers that are there. If you look at the numbers, Ireland is the country of choice for large multinational companies who are locating their EMEA offices here. So we've 9 out of the 10 top tech companies, all the top pharma and med tech companies, the top 5 global software companies, and the list goes on. Also, internationally, Ireland has been really highly recognised for the way that we have handled COVID from this year, and that has really stood us in good stead. And I would like to think, being in a third level institution and knowing my colleagues through ICOS across all of the institutions, that we continue to have the health and well-being of all of our students as a top priority, and that leads then into the employer section, into Aoife and her colleagues. So that those two things, the fact that we have top companies here, and the fact that we have managed COVID so well, that attracts top student talent, which employers are then availing of. So I don't know what's going to happen across the water, but I think that Ireland is well able to stand up on her own 2 feet on this one.
Okay, thanks very much, Shane. Listen, we've only a few minutes left. There's so much to cover here, but we have some questions coming through. Now, these questions are very specific to to each person's individual need at this time. So we may have covered some of this ground before. We want to try and give as much direct help to people as we can. So Shane, earlier this year, the government changed, this is a question here, the 1G visa access. And I would assume that the detail in this question is correct, but correct me if I'm wrong. So students who finish level 7 degree are allowed to get a 6-month visa. Is there any reason for that change, or do you know the background to it? Or are you aware of this?
I would level 7 6-month visa. I would expect that is down to the fact that the INS offices, which is now INS, that they were closed. So as we went through COVID, a lot of visas were extended for a period of time. A good example of that is that any student visas that were due to be renewed in June through to September, have automatically been extended out to January at this stage. So I would presume it's something to do with that, Rory.
Okay, and do you know, are level 9 graduates entitled to renew their 1G visa after a year, Shane?
Level 9, if you graduate in level 9, you have you can avail of a 2-year stay back. It is a 1-year permission, but you can avail of it twice. So it's a 24-month stay back. Okay. All of the visa permissions are on a year-long basis. So you go and you reapply, but there won't be any problem with reapplying, provided you meet the criteria.
And maybe just to add to that as well. Absolutely correct on that. They are 12 months. There is an automatic assumption that you're going to get a 2-year 1G. You won't. I have seen it granted in cases, but it has been a mistake, I think, on the immigration officer's behalf. You'll get 12 months. There are conditions attached to getting that renewed. So it's not an automatic given. So don't be disappointed if you get 12 months in the first instance. That's the policy around it. But you can.
Okay, and Aoife, there's another one here, which I think I'll put your way if you don't mind. A student has asked, do I have to apply for a graduate scheme permission before I'm done with my program? I presume means his program study. And if so, how do I go about that? Also, since it takes 8 weeks, is there a period of grace after the program to apply for the scheme?
Okay, I think the first thing is you can't apply until you've actually received your results. So there's no possibility to apply in advance of receiving your final results. You have to wait till they come through and you get your transcripts. Or I think sometimes, and Shane, you can maybe clarify this, I think sometimes a letter from the college is sufficient confirming you've passed until those officials come through. So that's the bottom line. You have to wait. It does leave it very tight, especially at the moment when there's such a wait to get your updated permission. There's no grace period. You're fine to stay here. You're absolutely fine to remain in Ireland. You're not required to leave the country or anything like that. But you will have to wait for your 1G to come through if you want to work those 40 hours after today, effectively after 1 October.
Okay. And if another one here is asked, if a non-EU national studying on a Stamp 2 visa wants to do the Chartered Accountancy program, what kind of visa would they need to apply for, and can they work and study for the Chartered Accountancy course at the same time? I presume that's within the 20-hour limit.
Well, you can apply for a particular type of permission. It's called Stamp 1A, and it's specific to trainee accountants. Now, in order to be eligible for that permission, you'd need to have graduated. You'd also need to have been offered a position with an eligible training firm. So you effectively would have a kind of a dual contract. So you'd have a contract with one of there's three registered accountancy bodies that are recognised, and you would also have a contract with an employer. Your employer would need to be acceptable by the accountancy bodies to allow you to undertake your training. You can work full time while doing your training and while sitting your exams. There are conditions attached to it. So when you go to renew like that after the first 12 months, you need to have sat and passed so many exams. You need to be able to prove a lot of different things, but there is a particular permission. It's called Stamp 1A. Okay.
Shane, do you want that? Or
no, that's the accountants is quite specific, and Aoife's covered it off on there. That's
Okay, and it seems to me, my takeaway from this is that the rules are the rules, and they are very hard and fast, and that change happens slowly in most cases with them, while rollbacks, as was happened as a result of COVID, can happen quite quickly. So I suppose advice for students, Shane, engage with your college services for the most up-to-date information.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I'd say there, Rory, is that the authorities have made a lot of progress over the last 18 months as far as processing student visas and renewals are concerned. You can now, if you're on an undergraduate program, you can now renew your visa online. You formerly had to go and make appointments, etc. So there has been progress. It happens in increments, but it is happening, and
Okay.
they do try things, and then if they work, they'll roll them out across the sector. So there is progress there. As far as students are concerned, and advice on getting jobs, one of the first things that we will always say to students, particularly, and we get a lot of level 9 students coming in to study a master's or an MSc, don't start looking for jobs on day one, because you might go through the process and you might be very qualified to take up a position with an employer, but you will then find that you can't do that because you are limited in the number of hours that you can work. So don't lead an employer through the steps and then not be able to take up that position, because that the employer will remember that. Secondly, engage with your careers coaches, engage with Grad Ireland, come to these events, gather as much knowledge as possible. And the careers teams in your colleges and your institutions know the difference between an Irish CV and what IFA and employers are looking for versus an international or non-Irish CV. And there are a lot of differences. So your careers team will point you in the right path and make sure that you are putting the best foot forward when you are applying for those roles.
Okay, we're just a little bit over time here now, but if you just wanted any closing thoughts, maybe on what Shane has said there, in terms of where students can go for the best information, or any particular tips you might have for them. Just
I would echo exactly what Shane was saying there. My advice would be do your research.
Yeah.
Be prepared. Don't jump into anything. Have that bit of background information, and I would say to students as well. Own your own immigration permission. Don't rely on the employer. They'll be there to help you, absolutely, but take ownership of it yourself. Take responsibility. Do the research. There's plenty of resources available. The INIS website, for general immigration is quite good. And as I said earlier, the Department of Business and Enterprise and Innovation is quite good when it comes to the employment permit side of things. So there's a wealth of information out there. It can be a bit of a minefield. So sometimes take any advice you can get off people, basically, is what I would say.
Okay, and Shane, the website for the Council for International Students, what's that?
ICOS, if you just do Google under www.icos.ie, that'll under the
information there for students.
Council has. That's a body that represents all students, all international students, and advocates for them in Ireland. So yeah, there's a lot of good information in there. Yeah.
Great. Listen, thanks so much. And I hope we've provided some practical information to students and graduates out there. Listen, thanks so much to have such experts on the subject. It's been a pleasure talking about Aoife and Shane. I'd like to thank them very much for the time. And thank you for joining us here today. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rory. Thanks, guys.
All the best. Bye-bye. Okay. Guys, thank you so much.
Thanks a million. That's cool, Rory.
That was great, guys. It was really good. Thank you so much. We covered so much there, and it's such a minefield, so it was great to have the expertise.
Yeah, you notice there that myself and Aoife